Hey guys, I'm Thomas with GP Suspension. Today we're going to be doing our cartridge install on a inverted 43 Showa fork for all the Softail models and others that Harley also offers. First thing, checking to make sure that the fork is clean. It's really critical that you have these things clean, and you don't want them slipping while they're in the vise or when you're putting tools on them. If something slips, you can scratch the anodizing, you can gouge the chrome tube, or you can damage the powder coating on the casting. And we don't want that. We want stuff that looks good and stays looking good. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna break our fork cap free, and we're going to pour out the oil. We're starting with our rebound leg. This is the more difficult leg to start with. If you are installing a extended length fork kit, so anything that's 2 inches or over, you're gonna actually have to remove both of the chrome tubes out of both of the castings. This is not that kind of a kit. This is actually a +1 kit, which utilizes our standard length chrome tube, inner tube. And so that way I don't have to pull the chrome tube out of the casting on the compression fork. And to clarify, when we install our cartridges, we always put the rebound leg into the right. There's not any other way to do it on this specific set of forks because, well, you'll see why. There's a different type of lower fork mounting mechanism between the compression leg and the rebound leg. So we're gonna start on the rebound leg first, and let's get started on that. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my fork cap tool. It is a 19mm Allen, and it's a common size in axle tools. So if you have an axle multi-tool, you can use one of those to get into the fork cap. And then you'll just have to use whatever size wrench fits your axle tool. Right now I'm using a 24 to unscrew this. So I'm getting this guy unthreaded. Finish it the rest of the way. I just heard it click. That means it's unthreaded all the way. I'm gonna lift up my fork and hold it up. The next step is I'm gonna actually break this nut free, which I believe it's a 17. All right, I guessed right. Break that free, I'm loosening it. And now the fork cap is free of the rod. On these 43 inverted forks, the right leg is a dummy leg. All it does is have a spring in it. There's no dampening out of the stock stuff. So what we're putting into it is a cartridge kit, which will allow this fork to be functional and not just a dummy leg. So on this kit, the first thing we have to do is actually pour all the oil out. So it's kind of difficult. It's nice if you have something to rest it in and just let it sit upside down for a little while. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. You don't wanna overextend this because there's holes inside of the chrome tube, and if you pull this oil seal past them, you'll pour oil everywhere. Sometimes it helps to compress the rod while you're trying to drain it, and it helps it pour out faster. So you can pump it and it'll drain out the oil that's in there a little bit easier. This side is a little bit difficult to drain the oil out of because you'll see in a second when we pull the outer tube, but there's actually a crown nut holding the spring in, and you can't take it out. On a normal fork, when you take the fork cap off, it would unload the spring and the preload tube, and it would all fall out, and it would just pour all the oil that's in there out of it very easily, like you'll see in the compression leg. But right now we just gotta get all this oil out so I can take the outer tube off. And to be clear, this is probably not the right set of forks to be wearing a white shirt to service in, so we'll challenge me a little bit to see if I cover myself in red oil. So this is reasonably enough drained at the moment to where I can pull the outer tube off. But before I can pull that off, I need to remove the dust seal and pop the circlip free. It's not really a perfect way to remove the dust seal. I usually like to go to the opposite side of the reflector. The reflectors get mounted on the sides of the forks. And so I'll go to the back side of it and I'll use a smooth flathead screwdriver, not one that's machined on the edges that has ribbing or anything crazy. And I'll just get the corner of it opposite the reflector because I want to put it on the, and I just push straight in. And I'm not actually going to pry or do anything crazy. I'm going to push the edge of the screwdriver in and flex the dust seal down like that. I just pushed it down. So the only thing that's touching is the rounded edge of the screwdriver on the dust seal. That way I don't scratch the anodizing on the outer tube and I can get the dust seal out of the way. The next thing, I'm just going to use a quick pick and I'm going to pull the circlip out, and I'm going to be very careful not to poke anything with the sharp part of the circlip on the fork. You notice I have the tip of the pick pointed out and away of the chrome tube. Pull that out. That's dropped. The next thing I'm going to do is, since we're being tricky, we're going to be a little bit bougie for the video. We're going to warm up the outside of the outer tube. Just has to be a little warm. It doesn't have to be hot. Just for it to expand away from the seal. That way I don't have to put too much effort into the bushings when I'm pulling the outer off of the seal. I'm going to go slowly at first to get any of the oil that's in between the inner tube and the outer tube between the two bushings, so it bleeds in and just kind of goes back into the fork itself. Now, that was it. 2 hits. That's pretty good. I'll take it. Get the oil off of it. You know, I'll say this again and again. It can never be too clean. The cleaner your situation is, the more you're seeing, and the better the end result will be. So I'm going to pull the bushings off. I'm going to pull off the oil seals, dust seals, circlip, and just get it past. We're not reusing seals, so we're going to go ahead and install this with the GP43 fork seals, which are available at the same time as your cartridge kit. If you make an order with us, you can order a set of fork seals, oil, and all of the appropriate tools to do the install. So now that I've got the outer tube off, I have to get the spring and this dampening rod out, even though it doesn't do any dampening. You know, that's why we're here. So I'm actually going to warm this head up right here. I'm not going to overdo it. Basically, I just want it to expand enough and affect the Loctite that's in here enough so it's easier for me to loosen up. So I'm just going to hit this with the flame. You can use a heat gun. It'll take a lot longer. You can use MAP gas. It'll go a lot faster than propane, but you want a little bit past warm to the touch. So I would say 150 degrees is what you're looking at, to where it's just uncomfortable to touch with your fingers. You can use the standard Harley crown ring removal tool. I find it to break frequently, so I have a different mechanism to use when I'm taking these off. So what I end up using is actually a rounded chisel and a hammer. So I'll actually use this chisel. I'll hold on to the dampening rod with my finger, and it's all pretty warm, so you got to be careful. But you want to make sure that this isn't going to move while you're smacking it with a hammer. So I'm holding on to the chisel, and it's going to damage this, and that's okay. Switch gears to the hard chisel here. All right, so it's moved. I don't need to spin it all the way around with the tool. I just have a preload adjuster for a shock that I bent in so I can make this curve. And you'll find that you can use a bunch of different mechanisms. We're not saving this part. It doesn't matter if it gets damaged. What you really don't want to hurt is you don't want to hurt the chrome tube. The chrome tube you're going to reuse, and you want to make sure that you take care of it. So if you're uncertain about this mechanism of how you're loosening up this crown ring, then either tape this with painter's tape, wrap a rag around it, zip tie it, whatever it takes for you to feel confident enough about hitting this with a hammer or whatever your mechanism is, right? So just be careful not to damage this, because if this gets damaged, then it won't slide freely, or it could possibly damage bushings, and you don't want that, because that means when bushings let go, then your chrome tube gets scratched or your outer tube gets scratched on the inside. So I'm gonna go ahead and unthread this. Now this is under pressure. There is spring pressure on it, so you do want to make sure that you're holding on to it so you don't have a spring get shot into the air. Ask how I know. So the stock Harley spring rate is a really, really, really soft spring with a absolute, just an insane amount of preload. They put something like, I think it's 90 millimeters of preload on a 0.75 spring. For normal spring rates, for a 500-pound motorcycle, you're looking anywhere from a 0.9 spring to a 1.0 spring. And they use a much, much softer spring with a lot of preload. In normal motorcycles, and how we set up our cartridges and our spring rates, is we use stiffer springs with much less preload, anywhere from the range of 8 millimeters to 14 to 16 millimeters is really the operating range of our springs. So you're just gonna get this guy loose and you're holding on to it. I'm actually putting pressure into this because, like I said, there's 90 millimeters of preload on this spring, and when it is fully unthreaded, it's gonna wanna lift my arm up out of the whole operation. So there we go. That's it. There's quite a bit of preload on that, and maybe not 90, maybe I was wrong, but get the spring spacer out, pop this guy free, don't drop your washer. And I don't know if I said this, but I have these little spacers that I put into our caliper carriers on the lower bung, so I can clamp this into the vise without damaging the cosmetic side of the caliper carrier. So I'm not damaging this powder coating. I have that spacer in there so I can clamp into it. All right, so that's free, dropping that out. We're not done yet. We're still getting there. So this is the right way to pull this chrome tube. The next step of this is we actually have to take this inner tube, this chrome tube, out of the casting and put in an adapter, because the trouble with this specific fork is there's no hole in the bottom. This has to be able to install a cartridge kit, you have to put something in between the chrome tube and the casting to hold the bottom of the cartridge for use. So we're putting that in right now. Heat is your friend. I'm putting a fair amount of force in there because we actually got to put a fair amount of force into loosening the chrome tube. So heat's your friend. I'm probably jumping the gun right now by putting fire to this to start with, but I'm gonna go grab my lollipop tool. Most suspension places have this tool. So if you're taking your cartridge kit to somebody to have them install this cartridge kit on your 43 inverted forks, then they have this, and this is technically the correct and proper way to do it. So I'm also putting this tool high up out of the traveling surfaces. If I put it right under the bushing, where the bushing face is, there's less likelihood of, if this thing slipped or if there's something that scratched the outer tube, there's less actual chance of it damaging anything in the interfacing relationship between the outer tube and the inner tube. It's less likely that there's any scratches that'll happen because you put it down here. This is where the seal passes through. This is where the outer bushing sits when the thing is traveling. So if there's any inconsistency, there's any scratches, it'll cause an oil leak and it won't look very good. So I always put any clamping surfaces up away from the up and away from the traveling surfaces of the chrome tube. So now that I have that installed, I'm just going to double check that it is not loose, and I'm actually going to loosen it back up because I remembered that I didn't put any cleaning agent on there, and we just had this thing filled with oil just a few minutes ago. So I'm going to spray it with my Maxima suspension clean, and I'm going to bolt it on. The suspension clean will dry off and make sure that it's a clean mating surface on this clamping face for this lollipop. Now I'm also, when I get this thing off, I'll show you how I would do it if I didn't have this tool. But since this is a customer's fork and I want to show the right way to do these installs, we're going to use the lollipop for this. So now is the time where I'm going to actually put some fire to this. It's okay as long as these aren't powder coated in the aftermarket to put heat to these directly, to put fire straight on them. It's okay. There is, heat is your friend when it comes to this, but you don't want too much because there is a point to where you can get this too hot to where this is expanding more than the aluminum casting actually can expand, and it can take all the threads out with it. So you want to get it to where it's hot enough that water will bead on it, on the surface here, but you don't want to get it too hot to where this is expanding. There's not really a visible way to tell that. So you just want to get it to where you're warming it up. You want to warm it up to where it just starts to bead when you put water on it. And I'll heat this up. And I also actually like to use penetrating oil. I'll spray on the chrome tube itself. So you'll notice that I just have it kind of pointed at one spot. That's okay. You can do it evenly. I noticed that it's a little bit more consistent and it'll free up more consistently if you're not moving this around too much. My favorite preferred spot to put flame is actually on the inside. And you'll know it's getting warm because the powder coating will stop looking black. It'll start looking gray. Once it's gray, that tells me usually I'm pretty close to my desired temperature. I grabbed a spray bottle. I've just got soapy water in this, and this will be my good indicator to see if it's bubbling up yet. It is not. And I know I just sprayed water all over this thing, but I'm actually trying to get some penetrating oil. One of my favorite, I like to get this on when I'm spraying it, because as it heats up, it starts outgassing, and you'll see bubbles accumulate over the mating surface as it warms up. You'll start seeing bubbles come up. Like I'm already seeing some right now because it's already pretty close to temperature. And it helps to have penetrating oil, because the reason we're heating it up to start with is because there's Loctite holding this. That's, there's Loctite in there. We want to break it free, and you can see we're outgassing right here. That's a good indicator that we're getting close to the desired temperature. And I'm using Aerocroil. It's totally fine if I catch a little bit of fire. You don't want to have so much sprayed on there that it hurts, that it'll, explode in your face or anything crazy. And just like that, this guy's freeing up pretty nicely. So you notice I'm going back and forth. And the reason for that is I'm trying to work that anti-seize, or yeah, I'm trying to work the penetrating oil deeper into the thread so it frees up a little bit easier. So I'm actually going to do a little bit more heat. There we go. We're off gassing pretty well now. So I'm sure if I steam it up, the water is not necessarily beating on it, but the lower the temperature that this is, the better, because you really don't want to play with interference, as interference as possible. I've done a bunch of these installs, so you really want to watch yourself with how much heat you're putting into the casting. So here we go. Now, when I'm doing a +2 install, I'll actually cheat. And the way that I'll cheat is I will leave the crown nut and the spring installed. Because if I'm doing a +2 kit and I'm installing the first, I'm removing the chrome tubes, this isn't going to get reused anyway. So I can just leave this crap installed, and I have to install my +2 inch chrome tubes. So I'll leave all that installed, but at this point, if you're unthreading and you have that crown nut installed, you can, that preload will want to release, and when you're unthreaded all the way, it'll pop up. And if you didn't drain the oil, you'll also have oil everywhere. So you always want to drain the oil. All right, that's it. That's what the bottom of the chrome tube looks like. It's a threaded. Right now is when I'll wipe all that off. All the Loctite, all the oil. Make sure that I didn't have any threads of the casting come out. We're looking pretty good. I'll also do a pretty close visual inspection to see what the wear looks like on the chrome tube. I can see a little bit of thrust wear in this. You can see like vertical lines kind of scratched into them. I don't find this to be too severe to where I don't want to go throw it on the lathe and do a polishing on it. I think this is sufficient. It's okay and expected given the amount of miles. I'm going to leave this on because I don't need to move it. There's nothing that's come out. I'm going to clean this casting. It does still have a bunch of oil on it, and right now I'm going to take this opportunity to remove this O-ring. This O-ring is pretty critical. Let's spray it off because it's going to get reinstalled. Spray it, dry it, and then grease it real fast because I don't want to take any chances with drying or with the denatured alcohol having a lasting effect on it. So most O-rings and plastic, they have a type of oil in them, and if the oil gets released through chemical means, heat means, or age, then it deteriorates the O-ring and they become less pliable. So there's that. This thing's still pretty hot, so I'm gonna free it out of the vise, clean it out, pour it. I'm spraying more of my Maxima suspension clean. You can use denatured alcohol, you can use simple grain, you can use whatever, because at this point, for cleaning this, all the safety it needs to have is it needs to not be able to damage powder coating. She's warm. She's warm. And another thing that we need to do along with the O-ring is take this washer out. We replace basically the space that this washer takes up with an adapter that threads onto the bottom of our cartridge. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this back up into the vise. Pretty hot. Got it nice, a little bit of force. Now I have the O-ring. It's greased up. I'm gonna add a little bit more grease, and I put the O-ring back as my first step. So there's a little recess in this casting that the O-ring will slot into, and I'll actually loosen it up and show the camera here. The O-ring sits like this inside of there, and if you're looking at it like that, I don't know if you've got good light, but if you're looking at it like that, you've got an issue. Make sure the O-ring sits in its recess the whole way around. If you tried to thread the fork tube in like this and you succeeded in torquing it down, you've just cut the O-ring in half. So we're gonna go ahead and fix that real quick. I like to use a pick. My fingers are too big to effectively maneuver that O-ring back into its spot there. So let's go ahead and fix that. And now I can go and grab my cartridge. So I'm gonna grab my rebound cartridge, take the fork cap and the spring guide and the spring jacker off of it. Do a little test real quick. So we are currently updating our process to where this specific part gets Loctited during assembly. We've designed this part to where this will slide in past the O-ring without having to remove the O-ring in advance. So, now that I have it passed, fight can come out. There's that. O-ring's okay. So I'm actually gonna dab a little bit of red Loctite in here, just a little. I'm gonna thread it back onto my cartridge. I'm gonna seat it hand tight. I'm gonna grab my cartridge install tool, which is also available through us. I'm gonna put it on the seal head. That's the correct way that it interfaces. And I'm just gonna go ahead and pivot my cartridge to get past the O-ring, just like that. And I'm gonna visually inspect the O-ring just to make sure it didn't get pushed out of the way. You can use a flashlight or some other mechanism, but it felt right when it went in. And then I'm going to do two things. I'm gonna grease this protruding lip of the chrome tube, just like that, on that face only. And then this guy is gonna get loaded up with red Loctite on all the threads. We are doing the whole way around, and I'm gonna spread it around with my finger, like that. Just like that. She's looking happy. I'm gonna take it all the way up, slide this guy right through there, and I'm gonna start threading it by hand. All right, it should thread almost all the way. And at this same time, the cartridge is only threaded onto that adapter. We call it a BPF adapter. That's our language. So I can spin this thing around, and as I'm tightening this guy, I'll know when it contacts based off of if this thing wants to spin or not. All right, so she's still spinning. This is still threading. We're getting pretty close now. I just felt my tension go up a little bit. I'm getting past the O-ring, and I'm really not putting a lot of effort. If you're at this point and you're having to put effort into this, you should take your chrome tube back out and clean the threads. The threads need to be cleaned. The castings threads need to be cleaned. When you were looking down the hole at the O-ring, what you saw was a clean casting for the most part. There's only so clean that it can be. We understand that. So here's the critical point that I wanted to share. When I thread this, as soon as I got to this point right here, it started to drag. When it just barely drags like this, I give this a good spin just to make sure it doesn't free up, because there's a shoulder on which the chrome tube is pinching against. And if it's not center, it'll pinch a shoulder. And the way that you make sure that you're not pinching your shoulder is by turning this, because it'll always want to follow to the path of least resistance. So when you twist this, it'll center itself and you can lock it down. So now I'm at that point. I know it's centered. It's nice and free. It doesn't want to spin if I put that tension on it. And now I'm going to lock this thing down, right? As much effort as it took to take off. Now take this guy out, which was a little premature. I'm going to put it back. And you saw that I clocked this when I was putting it in, trying to feel for those fingers of the seal head to fit around. This is a number 30 for this specific tool. The tool that we sell has a 3/8 drive that you can stick in the top of this. And now I'm going to torque my cartridge. That's not a normal noise, but it's acceptable. I probably overdid it a little bit there. So it spins nice and free still. I'm going to take my lollipop off, and I'm going to show you real quick another mechanism to hold on to the chrome tube to disassemble this thing. So this way, I figured I could do it because I actually had to do it. I didn't have a lollipop for my own personal bikes that was away from the shop. So I ended up taking a set of fork seal drivers. This is a 43, so you want a set of 43 fork seal drivers. Take this off the vise. Open this up enough. Take anything out that'll drop. And I'm going to take my fork seal driver. I'm going to put it on the chrome tube. But in this situation, I'm going to put it way up next to the bushing recess. And I'm going to put it into my vise to hold. Now that thing, it doesn't want to move. It doesn't want to move, but it's because my fork seal has little spacers. If you take those off, take those out, those little locating pins out of your fork seal. If you take these guys out, which they are removable, you can use this to hold your chrome tube. So you can use the axle to heat it up and break it free. That's a mechanism. I don't like doing it. If you end up having to do it that way, you just got to be really, really careful and make sure that if there's any scratches that happen, that you either get to sand them down with a really fine grit and wet sand them with oil. Just make sure that we don't have any scratches or anything difficult or anything that would damage bushings or oil seals. So I'm going to put this back on. I'm going to put my dust seal in. We're going to take your favorite special tool that you'll ever have to use, and we're going to install the oil seal. This is my favorite special tool that I ever have to use. What I do is I take a pair of scissors and I cut a corner off of it, and that corner is going to get installed here around the fork tube to protect your oil seal as you're installing it. Same with your dust seal. So when you're using your Ziploc bag or your shopping bag, what's really critical is that it goes past the bushing recess. The bushing recess, or if you've ever installed fork seals, this can cut the oil seal as you push it over, but it's actually this one that has a much higher likelihood of scratching and cutting the oil seal, which would cause a fork seal leak, which would cause you pulling it all back apart after you've, put your motorcycle back together and gotten to go ride it, only to find that it's dripping or dribbling oil. So let me grab. I'm grabbing my my GP fork seals for the 43Ss. It's also available at checkout when you're purchasing your cartridge kit and your tools. And I'm going to pull these guys out and get them prepped for our install. So I'm just gonna go ahead and leave this guy right there for now. And we're gonna start with our dust seal. Just like that. That's all it took. And we're gonna take assembly grease or assembly lube. I like the lighter, the better. When you have too thick of grease, it can cause some issues. And you're gonna go ahead and lubricate the sealing face of your oil seal or your fork seal. So we just wanna make sure it's evenly lubricated all the way around. And then you wanna make sure that you have the oil seal pointed the correct direction. If I just put it onto the fork like this, it would be backwards and it would leak because it uses this inner chamber here. When the fork compresses, the internal pressure of the fork increases and it actually presses this oil seal into the chrome tube tighter as you're compressing it. So it uses the internal pressure of the fork to help seal the fork itself. There's that. That's it. What's that? Slide this guy all the way down. And we're doing our right fork leg. So this would be the time to put your O-ring, which would be your fork travel indicator, onto it. So let me go grab one of those and I'll throw that on. So I'm over here, I'm just putting the fork travel indicator onto it. And the reason I'm throwing it on the rebound leg, on the right leg, is because when you have your bike on the kickstand, it's easier to look at without having to crouch down and look under the bike. So there's that. Get that passed, make sure there's not any crazy sharp edges. We're gonna go ahead and clean this guy up. We're gonna install our washer first off the back side of the oil seal. We're gonna put our outer bushing in, and then we're gonna put our inner bushing in to the recess up here. We're gonna go ahead and make sure they're all nice and greased. So I'm just gonna grease the leg right here, drag the bushing past it, and then I'm gonna lube up this bushing right here. And now we're ready to put the outer tube on. It's been draining. Leaking all over my nice counter. I'm just gonna hold that with my hand. Got my fork seal driver right here. If you wanna be extra, you can put a little bit of heat into this thing. It's not absolutely necessary. You just wait, you smack it a couple, 2-3 times to where you hear the sound of the oil seal bottomed out inside of it. Now I put my circlip in. I usually put it on like that, and I may take care not to drag the sharp ends of the circlip across the chrome tube. And in the process of putting those across, I actually just spread them open to clear the chrome tube. And what that does is it stretches them open a little bit better. So when you put them back into the fork, they have more resistance and they retain it. Their whole purpose is to retain the oil seal from getting pushed out. So when they have more tension against the outer tube, the better of a job that they can do. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and push the dust seal all the way home. Just clean it, make sure there's not any more dust on the dust seal. Go figure. And I'm not gonna put my rebound rod back in yet, but we are ready to start filling it with oil. So, one thing that we have to keep in mind when we're filling these up with oil is there is a cavity in between the inner tube and the outer tube between the two bushings. So that is usually filled up with air. If we were to just install this thing, bleed the cartridge and put it together, put the spring in, button it up, the first time we press into that, the oil is gonna actually work its way into that cavern and bring the oil level that we had just set that was up here, it'll drop it down, which brings us into risk for getting a oil level below a seal head, which can cause cavitation and cause problems. Most unsealed cartridges, they can't cope with a oil level that's lower than the seal head. So we really don't want that. So we want to make sure that when we're filling these up and we're setting our oil level, that this gets stroked throughout. So it always keeps that. So there's no change in between the oil level from it getting installed to it being ridden on the road. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill this guy with oil. I'm just looking for an oil level. It sucks when you accidentally overfill these things. Don't ask me how I know. This is Motul factory line 5-weight. You can also purchase that at checkout with oil seals, toolkit, and your cartridge kit, right? So I've got this filled up right to the point to where I almost overfilled it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do two things. I'm gonna stroke this. You don't wanna overstroke it, don't take it all the way to the top because there's some oil hole, there's some holes for it to self-bleed that cavity partway through here. And if you pull this past those holes, you'll cover yourself in oil and then feel the chamber between the dust seal and the oil seal with that oil. And it'll seem like you're seeping oil, but in fact, you just have a little bit of oil right there and you made a mistake. So I'm just gonna go ahead and stroke this a little bit. You'll actually notice that as it fills up with oil, that it actually gets a lot easier to stroke. So that's done. The rebound legs can be difficult to bleed at times. So what we end up doing is we end up filling it up pretty high with oil. We'll put our fork cap on, like so. And this is if you're having problems bleeding it. Like I haven't really attempted to bleed this by hand because I wanted to show you this trick to bleed these things up consistently. So we have no metering right now. It's not bleeding up. We want to change that because we want it to get bled up. So we're going to extend this all the way to where it's engaging the top out spring a little bit. We're going to thread this in and I'm actually going to compress this. And what's happening is the pressure on the outside of the cartridge inside the fork is greater than the pressure on the inside of the cartridge. So it's going to force that oil through the piston and the shims into the cavity of the cartridge that needs to have oil that we're trying to bleed the air out of. So I'm just going to go and compress it and first try it bled up, right? So, and you can tell that it's bleeding. I'm just going to leave it compressed. Pull it up. You can start hearing the squeaking. It's getting stronger and stronger. There we go. Let me go ahead and loosen that up. Compress that all the way. Take my fork cap back off. Now, I'm going to set my oil height. Careful not to drop your fork cap. And now this thing's bled up and it's actually still bleeding up. So make sure you finish this bleeding until you don't hear any bubbles coming out. All right, that sounds good. So I'm gonna take my rebound adjustment rod out. For this specific kit, I set it at 160. So 160 millimeters of oil height. That's fully compressed. That's the cartridge compressed. That's this compressed. And it's to the top of the cap adapter where I have the threads at. It's where it stops. This is where you measure it from. You can hear that I haven't touched anything. So we're gonna add some more oil. Try this again. There we go. So we're bled there. I'm gonna stroke this right there. And I gotta put my spring spacer in. We measure our oil heights with the spring spacer because if you want to tune your bike and change your oil height, you don't have to fish it out. It makes it easier. It makes it more consistent for you to where you don't have to be worrying about two different special tools to set your oil height. You only need the one. So go ahead and that's set in there. It's pressed all the way down. And I'm gonna pull the last little bit of oil out that the spring spacer had displaced. So in goes our rebound adjustment rod. And we're gonna think about springs now. So when you made your order, you gave us your weight, you gave us your riding style, and we came up with a solution specifically for you. So we're gonna put our stronger spring rate into our right fork. We're gonna get our GP suspension pull tool, and we're gonna thread this guy on. And you wanna make sure it threads on more than a half a turn, because there is 2 different sides, so that means there's 2 different thread pitches. So we thread that on. We're going to put our spring jacker in. You're going to take your flat wrench. There's a side that has a hole and there's a side that doesn't have a hole. And you're going to pick the side that doesn't have the hole, which is a 19mm, and you're going to slide it into the cap adapter just to the edge, because we have to pull the pull-up tool to get this tool installed right there. Now, that's how it gets engaged, but I'm going to show you real quick what you're putting the flat wrench into. So this is what the flat wrench holds onto when you slide it through the spring jacker. Basically, right now when I pull up, I'm actually working against a top-out spring. That top-out spring is probably one of the things that separates us from the rest of the aftermarket industry and really elevates us to having a better rideability and a better function of use with our cartridge kits. So springs back in, put my spring jacker back on, and I'm gonna slide this guy up to that point. That guy back, and now I'm gonna put my fork cap in. This is a really critical point. When you purchase this cartridge kit, and if you purchased a tool kit for the cartridge kit, it came with your pull tool, it came with a fork cap tool, and it came with a flat wrench, which is currently up there. This is not the time for this. When we're tightening this fork cap to the cap adapter with the flat wrench, you're gonna grab a 14 mil. You're gonna put it on the preload adjuster up there, and you're gonna tighten it down. If you try to tighten it down with this, or if you try to loosen the preload off of the fork with this, you will lock up the fork cap. You don't want to do that, because it probably means a call to us, which we're open to, but rather educate you on the correct install. So I went ahead and I tightened that down. It's about 20 Newton meters. I do it so much that I know the tension by hand. You don't want to overdo it because it can be a pain to break free. And that is basically it on specifically the fork cap. You go ahead and lift that up, thread it in, get it threaded to where the O-ring is engaged, or if you can thread it all the way to where it's mated, then cool. But I'm going to use this opportunity to clean the fork leg. Once again, I'm using my suspension clean, something that's not necessary brake cleaning because we don't want to damage any of the anodizing. And we want to make sure that we don't spray it into the fork because we don't want it breaking down the oil. Clean the fork cap too. Even though this isn't my final clean, I'm just making sure that this is where it's looking good. So I'm gonna take this free now. Get my little washer out that protects the finish of the casting. Open this guy up enough. Now, if you don't have a vise that's got soft jaws like this one, you can get this threaded on as much as possible, and then you can install it in your bike into the triple clamp and finish torquing it there. You can pinch it with the triple clamp of your bike and finish torquing it. And that's fine. But I'm gonna go ahead and use our fancy fork cap tool and install it. The back side of the fork cap tool is a 24mm hex. So I'm just gonna go ahead. I'm holding on to the fork, so if I feel it slipping, I stop. So you don't want to scratch the anodizing. And you also want to pinch at a spot to where you think the triple is going to be at. You know, I fudged the rules a little bit because I still have my base that's holding the fork up. If I would have moved that out of the way, I would have clamped it down in the spot where the triple tree clamps at. So that fork cap is torqued. And while we're here, we're just going to set the clickers real quick. Just put it to a quick base setting. It's pretty simple for us. Our settings are almost on everything right now, 13 and 13. So what I'm doing is I'm tightening the brass adjuster at the center of the fork cap inside the preload adjuster. Tightening it until I feel a little bit of resistance, till it doesn't want to thread in anymore. Don't overdo it. Less is more. And then I'm gonna count backwards. 13 clicks. So I actually want to fix how this is sitting in there real quick. There we go. And that circlip stays in there. It's not meant to be removed. You want the circlip to be in the fork cap. That's basically there. If you keep unthreading and unthreading and unthreading, that your rebound adjuster or your brass adjuster doesn't leave the preload adjuster and cause a huge oil leak. We don't want that. So step 2 is, you saw when I was threading the fork cap onto the cap adapter that once I got to a certain point, it started compressing the spring. Our cartridge kits are all designed to have 6 millimeters of preload installed. So when this thing is completely unscrewed, all the way unscrewed out, it has 6 millimeters of preload in it. So you're never going to be able to not have that 6 millimeters preload. If your bike is too stiff and you're trying to take preload out, don't go at taking the preload out of the cartridge internally. The right move is probably A, geometry, getting the fork height correct, or B, going down in spring rate. So we always want that 6 millimeters of preload in there at a minimum. I usually like 8 millimeters total at a minimum, period. That's my personal rule. Suspension has a bunch of different opinions, and that's what's beautiful about it. Everybody has their own different way of coming up with solutions. So I'm gonna put 6 more millimeters of preload into this. We have a total of 12, and then we're gonna be at our baseline with our rebound fork leg. So when you have, and that's it, that's all the preload that needs. This fork is done once we clean it, and it's ready to get installed. That being said, we have 3 different colors of preload adjusters. If you get anything but black, you got to be really careful with the tools you're using on this, if you're jamming tools on it, because you can damage the anodizing. And you want to be really careful about taking care of your anodizing, because you want your bike to look pretty and you want your adjusters to look pretty after use. So it would suck to scratch it the first time you got the fork installed while you were tuning it. So just be wary and careful. So the compression leg, we're gonna breeze through. This is not gonna be nearly as long as the last fork leg was, because it's not as complicated. The difference between the 2 forks is pretty simple. I have a bolt going through the center of the fork, and it holds the stock damper assembly in place. But first, we're gonna go ahead and take our 19 millimeter axle tool, or in this case, fork cap tool, and we're gonna loosen up the fork cap. Made sure the thing's clean, making sure that it's good. I went and polished everything to make sure that we're not gonna accidentally damage anything, and it also will give us a report card of what it looked like going into the install, so we have a better reference of what it's going to look like after the install. So I have this thing just snug. I don't wanna damage anything. I'll go ahead and loosen that up. So that's free. O-ring's already relieved. Loosen this guy. Now, if you're doing a +2 kit, you would be doing the exact same thing that you had to do to remove the chrome tube. Well, almost the exact same thing. You wouldn't have to take the crown nut off of the top, as you can see here, but you would have to be taking the chrome tube out of the casting again, which sucks, but hey man, you got 2 extra inches of fork length. It's worth it in the end. So what I'm gonna do here is actually get this thing freed up like this. I can do a couple different things, but the simplest thing for me, which what I do, I like simple. I like to keep it simple. I'll take my special spacer, put into the caliper carrier's lower mount, and I'll go ahead and pinch it back into the vise. So instead of doing anything up here and trying to pull this down while I'm breaking the fork cap free so I can get the spring and the spring spacer out, I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take the retention bolt out of the damper. And what it is a 6 millimeter Allen. And you do need to have a little bit of a longer Allen key. This thing's about 3 inches, and that's what it's gonna have to take to get past the axle block. So I'm gonna go ahead and break this free by hand real quick. I do have a quick little trick. I'll thread this guy in because it won't want to dump all of its oil so quickly if I have the cap threaded on. So what I'll do is I'll grab my screw gun, I'll grab my screw gun, put that same Allen on there, hold this down, because I am fighting a bunch of spring preload. Get that into the bolt. There we go. I didn't want to cover my tool in oil, so you have to pardon the speed at which I pulled that out. But I can go ahead and unthread this, and you'll see that there's oil pouring out of the bottom of the fork now. This is just my quick trick to not have to deal with this and just save time here. So you notice, pulling up the spring spacer and the cartridge, it's all covered in oil, and it's also dumping oil out of the bottom, but this is normal. And now the spring's coming out. So I'll grab it by the spring, let it all rest into place, pull this out in one piece, deal with the extra oil that's spraying everywhere. That's not important. Give everything a quick wipe down because this stock Harley oil gets on everything and it's hard to clean off. So while that's all draining there, I'm going to go ahead and go to the opposite side of the reflector, just like the rebound leg, and go ahead and flex off. Just probe the side of the dust seal, push down. I'm going to use the side of the screwdriver, flexing against the rounded face of the screwdriver to get that dust seal off the rest of the way. That way I don't damage the anodizing. We just keep it nice, keep everything looking cherry. Now I'm taking my pick tool and I'm making an effort to not put this against the chrome tube because I don't want to scratch it. So I'm just using that tool, find the end of it to flex this down and get it off. Just like that. Drop this guy out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and slide this all the way out to empty the cavity between the two tubes. You can see all the oil coming down now. I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to warm it up just a little bit because you got the fire right here and we might as well. There we go. There we go. All right. Set that aside for now. Take my rag, wipe all the excess oil off so it doesn't trip everywhere on the casting. This would be your point to where you throw your lollipop after you take these bushings off onto the chrome tube and remove it. This side does not have a crown ring that's threaded into the tube, and it's not holding its spring down, so it's not as involved to do. However, if you do remove this, you do not have to remove the washer, the steel washer that's between the chrome tube and the casting. You leave that in. That thing on the rebound leg gets removed so the adapter can fit in the same place without changing the overall length of the chrome tube. Get this guy out. There's that. And now we can clean it. We can install our cartridge and start putting it back together. I'm looking for gouges, I'm looking for anything that would cause fork seal damage, I'm looking for anything that would indicate that the bushings are getting old. Lots of thrust wear would also indicate that your bushings are getting old, so you want to pay attention to that. Anyway, I've got our new GP suspension fork seals and dust seal, and I'm going to use my super fancy special tool to get these fork seals on without damaging them. And remember to lube the inside of the fork seal with a light grease. You just kind of want it to be wet so you don't wear the oil seal at all as you're sliding it over the metal. And this would be a good opportunity to flex this open, put that on. We're going to put our retention washer rounded side towards the seal. We're going to put our bushing in. We're going to throw on our inner bushing. We're going to look for any hair or anything that could get into there and cause issues in the future. So now that's there. I have my outer tubes ready to go back on. Clean my area. Now, since these were just wet and they're still kind of wet, I didn't really bend over backwards to grease them up, but since we're here and I'm showing you the right way to do this, I might as well do it. So there is that. I'll hold that there, holding the oil seal and the outer tube up. Put my fork seal driver in. I can use this opportunity to warm this up, but it's still pretty warm from when I removed it. So there we go. It's full home now. I'm gonna go ahead and slide my circlip up, just kind of get it set, and then I use half of my fork seal driver, set it home the rest of the way, visually inspect it, and then slide my dust seal into it just by pressing down. So this is it. That was all that that fork really needed, effort-wise, to get it ready for our cartridge install. All right, I was just doing a quick function check because it's so ingrained into my routine with doing these installs now and building these cartridge kits. So I'm going to grab my cartridge holding tool, go ahead and slide it back over and index it on the seal head. It'll be a little bit more annoying to find it, but I found it pretty quickly. And you can twist it left and right and feel it engage. And the next thing I'm doing is I'm fishing my bolt out of my drain pan or whatever your mechanism is to catch your oil. And I'm gonna make sure I need to track down my old crush washer. So we're gonna find the crush washer. It's probably siliconed up in there. I'm using my pick to get it out. And this is one of the times that if I would have just put a new crush washer in and torqued it down, it would probably seep, because generally things that are hydraulic don't like when there's two mechanisms of sealing. When you put two sealing washers on, it makes it about half as effective. So I've got my new crush washer on. I'm going to spray off the threads of the bolt because Harley likes to use silicone. It's not really necessary for our cartridge kit. Set that aside and continue to try to pry out that old crush washer. I'm just using a flathead to get the edge of the crush washer. Crack it free. There we go. So they like to use the silicone to kind of help assist sealing this thing. And a lot of the times it'll actually cause it to stay stuck to it. So you've got to really watch out for that. So almost ultimately, I'm gonna grab my number 6 Allen and start threading it into the cartridge lower. I'm using the cartridge holding tool to thread it in to start with. So there's that. Grab my low impact driver real fast, give it a little quick buzz. There's that. And then I'm going to torque it, but check your service manual because it does use the same exact torque spec. This is just the setting that I've been using here at the shop. There we go. Take your cartridge holding tool out. And now we're ready to start filling it with oil. Every couple of years we like to do oil tests where we'll test a bunch of different brands of oil once people come out with new stuff. And just last winter we were doing our biannual run of tests and decided that the Mow tool works best for our application, and we now sell it now we sell it with all of our stuff on our web store, along with our cartridges and our tools and our fork seals. So I don't know why I'm grabbing that yet. So I'm gonna use this opportunity to bleed it. It's bleeding up really quick and really easy. Don't need to do anything crazy. You can hear it too. It's pretty much what it sounds like. That's what it should sound like. And grab your bleed tool. I want to engage the top out spring a little bit more just to make sure that I'm getting as much of it bled as possible. There we go. So the whole philosophy behind our top out spring is it actively works against the mainspring. So in the period of time to where your fork is not traveling any further, or it's on the rebound and then it hits another bump, that the moment of inertia doesn't require more force initially. It just makes it to where it, when the top out spring is engaged, that it's got a more progressive, low amount of initial spring force to change the direction of the fork. And it helps with feel and it helps with traction in certain situations. So now we've got oil in it. We're gonna check our oil height again. We're stroking our outer tube because we want to make sure that it has the cavity filled with oil and it doesn't quite have enough oil in it yet. So we're going to put some more in. I have too much in there now. So we're going to go ahead and take this out. I'm going to go ahead and slide it down to where it's on the cap adapter. And you can hear I just filled up the entire oil level tool. That's not normal. Now I'll go ahead and put it back on. Up to our cap adapter, rebound rod is out. Set our oil height. Once it sucks air in, we know the oil level is where it's supposed to be. I'm going to stroke it one more time. Drop our spring spacer in there. We're not dropping it from up here, we're dropping it pretty low so it doesn't blast any oil out of it when it hits the level of the oil. And then we're gonna set the oil level again. That's good. Now we can put our rebound adjustment rod in. Got a little bit of grease on it. And don't do that. That's what happens when you overfill it. When you're pushing the rebound rod, the oil that's inside the cavity will want to come out somewhere and it's up. All right, so it's our pull rod, our pull tool. Thread it on to where it makes sure that you make sure that it threads on more than one turn. Get your spring. You want to put your engraving up. So if you take your fork cap off, you can see what rate spring you have easily without having to take the spring out and get oil everywhere. Put our spring jacker on. Time for our flat wrench, just like last time. Just edge the flat wrench on barely, and we're gonna pull it up. Engage the top up spring all the way. Center it. Take the rod off. Take our fork cap and install that. Remember, we're using the 14mm wrench on the preload adjuster here, not the fork cap tool. So there's our 14. It's engaging the 6mm of preload that we build into all of our kits right now. Slide that out, that away. Go ahead and give this a quick wipe real quick. Slide that up. Tighten this down. So I have it mated, but doesn't mean I'm done. I need to put it back in the vise after I'm done cleaning it. We want it to be oil-free for the vise so we don't scratch the coating. I'm happy with that. Make sure you don't drop your caliper bracket spacer. And you'll want to clamp it in a position that gets clamped by the triple tree normally. So we're going to take our fork cap tool, align the pin, the dowels over the holes on the fork cap itself. Grab your 24, snug it up, hold on to the lower so it doesn't spin, or if you do feel it spinning, you immediately stop. And we're gonna set our adjusters. You grab your 3mm Allen tool, and you're gonna screw it all the way in until you feel resistance. I feel resistance, and I'm gonna count back 13. 13 right there. That's our baseline setting. That's where your starting point for your specific setups for you to build off of. That gives us a good indicator if you need to go softer, you need to go stiffer. So I'm gonna unscrew the preload adjuster all the way. It's all the way unscrewed. If you keep fighting this thing, it'll lock it up, and that's a bad time. But we're gonna count 6 turns in to be a total of 12mm of preload. Every turn is equal to 1mm of preload. So we're gonna put 6 more in because we already have an installed amount of 6mm. 4, 5, 6. All right, that's baseline. Do your final cleaning of it, and it's ready to go into the bike. We've done a lot of work on getting geometry settings figured out. So if you buy a +1 bagger and you know what length shock you have, and you're going to upgrade your shock, or you're going from a standard length low S to a +2 low S, and you have a new shock for the whole thing, give us a call. We're more than happy to give you our setup information on how we set these things up to have the ideal geometry that was that I put together for what I consider to be an ideal situation based off of my own experience and report cards when I'm setting up geometry on bikes. So there's that. That's our low S. Again, give us a call if you have any questions, comments, concerns. We're more than happy to help you out over the phone, over email, whichever. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoy your new cartridge kits as much as we enjoy making them. So have fun, stay safe out there.